What is a mystery that science hasn't explained and should by now? Story 1. Gravity is really poorly understood. Newton's laws describe its effects well at the macroscopic scale, but break down for describing really small and really large phenomena. General relativity helps, but again, it's descriptive more than explanatory. And a quantum theory of gravity is still a dream. It's one of the four fundamental forces of nature. But we can't explain how it propagates or where it comes from. And why, compared to the other forces, is gravity so weak? Work at CERN on the Higgs boson may shed some light, but for the moment, we can't explain why I always fall down and not up when I drink too much. Story 2. Devil's Kettle. Geologist here. Swallow holes like this aren't entirely uncommon. I've been to one in Timor-Leste that drains an entire lake. The sole river flowing out from that lake flows southeast towards a mountain range and then just drops into a giant hole. In all likelihood, it flows under the mountain range and empties somewhere under the ocean over 5 kilometers away. I'd be willing to bet that the water going into Devil's Kettle ends up coming out somewhere under Lake Superior. If the outlet is deep enough, tracer dyes would be too dilute to detect by the time they got to the surface, and ping pong balls would be pretty easily trapped underground without even making it to the lake. The real mystery in this case seems to be that this type of thing is occurring in rhyolites. Everywhere I've seen similar sinkholes and underground rivers, it's been in limestones, which are easily dissolved. Rhyolites, however, are much more resistant to processes of chemical and physical weathering. Story 3. Human appreciation of music. I don't believe there are any confirmed biological evolutionary explanations for why particular combinations of noise in a particular sequence are pleasurable to us. I know at least a little background on this. If you look at the shape of the sound wave for, say, a C and compare it to an E and a G, they fit inside of the C well. The C sort of has the E and G ingrained into it. So when you play a C major chord, the three mesh and sound good. That's why being in tune is important, else the sound waves will be warped a little and not fit quite right. Fun fact, you can actually experience this phenomenon firsthand with a timpani. These drums have pedals that stretch the head to change the pitch on them. If you have it tuned to a particular note, you can hum that note about an inch away from the head, and the whole thing will ring with the sound. That's not surprising. However, you can hum related notes into it, and it will also ring, because the overtones of one note contain the other. C and AC, though, don't have this feature, and being a half step away from one another, they clash and sound dissonant. Their sound waves don't play nice. Common themes in music then stem from that. A lot of songs end in VI, which would be GC in the key of C. They seem to resolve well because, again, the shape of the sound waves fit together almost like puzzle pieces. I'm afraid I don't have a source to link to this, because it has been quite some time since I read about it. I've been entrenched in the serious music world for over 10 years, though, and I can at least say that there's nothing in there that glaringly makes no sense. Story 4. Migraines. I could be wrong, but last I knew, doctors still aren't 100% sure on the cause or cure of migraines. I was about 10 when I started getting migraines. Really bad ones, too, with the colored auras flashing in my eyes, losing my vision. Everything I heard would be amplified, and I'd get terrible headaches and nausea. It would happen nearly every day, too. Went to the doctors, and it was really hard to explain what was going on. At first, they pretty much told me to just do some massaging techniques and deal with it. It just kept getting worse and worse. So they put me on Inderall? I think that was it. Anyway, it didn't really help much, because I kept getting them. Then the seizures start. It would start out as a migraine, getting progressively worse until I had trouble breathing and would start doing the crappy fish flop. The first one happened while I was waiting for a bus, and I woke up in an ambulance wondering what the hell happened. This was the first of many. I had CAT scans done, MRIs, everything. Couldn't find anything wrong at all. Still can't. They put me on 1,000 milligrams a night of Depakote and Relpax tablets to take when the migraine would start. Helped for a while, then they'd come back. So, as it stands today, I don't have them nearly as often as I did when I was younger. 25 now, and I get a seizure twice a year at most. This year, I haven't had one yet. I get minor migraines a couple times a week, where it'll seem to start but stop after a few minutes. I've heard it described as migralepsy, but that's about it. Story 5. I have a small LED light in a cube. one for like $1 from a fireworks thing or something. I have it on my bedside table, and about once or twice a week, it will go on again, lighting up randomly for a while. This has been going on for well over a year from a tiny battery. It has run out of battery, and whenever it goes off, I can't turn it on or off. One day, I will find out the source for the infinite power supply. I bought a super cheap alarm clock my freshman year of high school that ran on a single AA battery. I never changed it. I went home for Christmas during my fourth year of college and was up really late playing something on my laptop when I heard this super faint beeping. I dug around in my closet and found the alarm clock going off. Its alarm had been going off every night for like 8 years on one double a battery. Batteries are a balanced reaction. As soon as temperature or maybe even air pressure or the amount of water in the air changes, so does the balance of the reaction. This balance will be disrupted and will start stabilizing itself. This causes electrons to shift from one side of the battery to the other. Most batteries have two internal parts. And ta-da, your little bit of electricity. Story 6. What is the actual cause in the variance of human weight? I mean, beyond the basic calories in versus calories burned. Why can you take a group of similarly aged boys, send them to military basic training, feed them the exact same meals, expose them to the exact same levels of exercise and sleep, and after 8 weeks, find so much variance in muscle mass and body fat? Which genes and glands or hormones or whatever are behind these differences? And how? This isn't that unknown. In fact, it is quite well known, as far as I'm aware. An individual's metabolism can change dramatically with the environment, and specifically, it can be programmed to behave in a certain way that corresponds to the environment that it is being brought into. A very simple example is if you are formed and born in an environment in which your mother was undernourished. When you are being formed, your body adapts to this by programming itself to store as much energy as possible as it's coming, being born, into a world that is short on energy. As every mother has a different diet while they are having their child, the metabolism of the child will be wired differently. Therefore, give some people the same food, and their different wired metabolisms will store and use more energy. This is obviously a very simple example, and there are so many factors that are at play, but there are some good studies out there on this topic. Story 7. How bicycles work. Specifically, why they stay up so easily. I thought we did know. Contrary to popular belief, it's not the wheels spinning that keeps you up, it's you. Sure, they help a little bit, but you still need to ride it. This is why you have to learn how to ride a bike. What do you learn? Counter steering. When the bike begins to lean one way, you steer ever so slightly the other way. The faster you are going, the less you have to steer, and vice versa. Try riding a bike really, really slowly, and notice how much steering input you have to use to keep yourself centered. This is also a reason why the misconception that the wheels themselves are spinning keeps you up. This won't happen unless you're going much faster, and even then it's very hard to do. Story 8. Why can some people sing and others can't? Aside from breathing techniques and tone deafness, there must be a reason. I did chorus in high school and learned how to raise my vocal range, but I still sounded flat. Yet, my friend who sounds like Bruno Mars can sing lying down on the floor or when he has a cold. I know breathing and posture are essential, but clearly, as stated above, there is more to it. How can someone have weak vocal cords? We all talk and laugh. Why is it that Christina Aguilera has this amazing vocal ability while Katy Perry could never go as high as her? It just perplexes me so much. Story 9. I'll mention some stuff that surprised me in my anatomy course this semester. There are things in our body, aside from the brain, which makes sense, whose actions we still don't understand. There are these cells in our parathyroid gland that are called oxyphil cells. People have ideas about what they do, but to this day, nothing is for sure. There are also chromophobes and amphiphilic in our anterior pituitary that people are still unsure about. I don't know, I just assumed that we had the non-nervous system parts of the brain figured out. Yet, there are still things we have left to learn. Story 10. Ghosts. If you believe in them, you don't need evidence, and if you don't believe in them, no evidence will ever satisfy you until you experience it firsthand. I'd love to be skeptical and not believe, because where would it stop? If a person's consciousness can carry on without a body in the form of energy, then things like magic can be plausible, right? It's just making energy do crap, basically. But there are just too many damn people encountering apparitions they can't explain. I'd bet 95% can be debunked, which is why I love ghost hunters. Because they go into an investigation trying to disprove a haunting, tell you why you're not haunted and how to fix it. But even they have evidence they can't explain. Ghosts are hard to believe in, but there's just too much evidence out there to simply dismiss it. A part of me is kind of scared that one day science will find out what's behind it all and take away one of the last few remaining unknowns in the world. I thought it was pretty obvious that ghosts exist only in people's imaginations and are a type of psychosis caused by hysteria and belief in ghosts. People who see ghosts would benefit from understanding that everything they see is imagined. And if it progresses to a haunting, then it's time to seek medical help, not an exorcist. Neuroscience has pretty much debunked dualism, the belief that the mind and brain are separate. So spirits wandering free from bodies isn't possible. Story 11. A grad student at my university gave a lecture on this today, and it was very fascinating and something I had never really given much thought on before. How were the pyramids actually built? The prevalent theory is that they used incredible amounts of manual labor, moving 2-ton blocks by pure strength up 10-degree ramps to shape the pyramids. After further analysis, they found that it would be almost impossible for the Egyptians to be able to find that much manpower and material. The theory that the grad student is working on is that the Egyptians were a bit skilled in materials science and engineering themselves, and they were able to use a lot less labor by making synthetic limestone by mixing different materials. There is a lot of research backing this theory, but nothing is definitive yet. So, it is pretty interesting that the engineering of the pyramids, which date back to around 2000 BC, are still a mystery to engineers and scientists. Story 12. My teacher said that from his understanding of the research, that the brain needs to organize and prioritize what to remember and make connections to that information. Like a network, the brain needs to store memory in a certain area and make reference to that information in a log. And from there, prioritize the information in the log. If there are multiples, then it is most likely moved higher up. Like the saying, you never forget to ride a bike. That is information your brain has stored and processed. Memories can be recalled in different ways, associated with how it was stored. Muscle memory, music, smells, tastes, all can be triggers associated with this information. Like when you listen to a song from high school and remember the name of a girl you dated. But for all I know, he was blowing sunshine up my skirt, as my pappy would say. Story 13. Maybe I'm missing something. I'm shocked at the confusion over sleep. Isn't it just our brains sorting and storing info and our bodies resting and recuperating? And who thought that sleeping through the night is an invention of the industrial age? What are you talking about? Naturally, humans sleep when it gets dark and awake in the light. It's the circadian rhythm. All animals that aren't nocturnal do this. How is this some mystery we should have figured out by now? Story 14. One thing I'd say is why we experience deja vu. One theory I've seen is that deja vu is a glitch in your brain's short-term memory system. You encounter a situation, your brain makes a short-term memory imprint of the situation, but then it makes a short-term memory imprint again, like the second imprint was made without you realizing you already had one. And your brain notices that you have two copies of the sensory impression of the situation and thinks that one of the copies must be from long-term memory. You might reasonably know that you haven't experienced this situation before, but the impression of the new situation being familiar will still be there. Story 15. A few days ago, I was sitting thinking about the universe and stuff. I recalled reading about some very old galaxies that appear to travel with near or faster than the speed of light. Then I noticed the makeup mirror of my GF. You know those with two sides, one of which was making stuff appear bigger. So I began playing with my face by moving my head and distorting it. Then I noticed that some parts moved faster than others. Then came the holy crap moment, when I thought, what if we only seem to see those galaxies moving fast because we see their light optically distorted by some force, just like I saw my face? Then I remembered this effect. When we see galaxies that are behind other bigger clusters, and those clusters, gravity acts like an optic, and we see the other galaxies behind them. So if we move in a different direction with that cluster, we might actually see some very faint distant galaxies behind them to move faster than possible. Maybe it's not a cluster, but the dark or whatever force. I don't know much about astronomy and physics. Maybe this is already known, or maybe it's funny to think that way. Story 16. There have been a few over the years that appear to be too big and precise to have been created by humans in the time taken, and also in the dark without the creators being seen. I'm just saying it'd be interesting to know how they come about. I'm not saying they're done by aliens. There are meteorological and natural explanations that have face validity. It'd be good to investigate them more seriously. It takes ages for a qualified team to mark out a construction site. So I'm interested to know how an intricate pattern, several hundred feet long, spanning hedgerows, can be imprinted on uneven, sometimes sloping ground perfectly, in the dark, by some pissed blokes with a plank of wood. Story 17. Similar to the gravity phenomenon, friction. Newton also described how that works, but it's so weird. It depends on the two materials rubbing together and the force between them, but nothing else. It seems intuitive that it should rely on surface area, but it doesn't. To experiment, take a textbook and slide it across your desk. Now, stand it up and do the same. While it takes some finesse to have it not fall over, you still need to use the same force to overcome friction and have the same frictional force, even though there's a tiny amount of book actually touching the desk. Also, why is the frictional force higher when the two surfaces aren't moving relative to each other? Hence why it's harder to get something moving than to keep it moving. Friction is one of the most important forces around. Kind of helps us walk, drive, pick things up, etc. And we have absolutely no idea why it works. Storiosomniast UFOs. The evidence is really undeniable at this point. You can sit there and tell me UFOs aren't real, but I know the only reason you would be saying that is because you haven't done any research on the subject and are just repeating what you have heard from your culture and the media. Now, I'm not saying UFOs are vehicles from another planet flown by aliens, because that idea is hard to believe. But they are definitely up there. Photographic, video, and even radar evidence backing up eyewitness testimony of credible witnesses, commercial pilots, air traffic controllers, high ranking military officials, ex President Jimmy Carter, and about 11 million others, can only be ignored for so long. How can people not be curious about that crap? Story 19. The encephalitis lethargica epidemic that struck between 1915 to 1926. No one knows why it happened, nor has there been a recurrence since the initial outbreak. From Wikipedia, the disease attacks the brain, leaving some victims in a statue-like condition, speechless and motionless. Between 1915 and 1926, an epidemic of encephalitis lethargica spread around the world. Nearly 5 million people were affected, a third of whom died in the acute stages. Many of those who survived never returned to their pre-existing aliveness. They would be conscious and aware, yet not fully awake. They would sit motionless and speechless all day in their chairs, totally lacking energy, impetus, initiative, motive, appetite, affect, or desire. They registered what went on about them without active attention and with profound indifference. They neither conveyed nor felt the feeling of life. They were as insubstantial as ghosts and as passive as zombies. Story 20. Here's one I learned about recently. In 2000, a mummy was found around Pakistan with an inscription on the sarcophagus, claiming her to be the unknown daughter of the Persian king Xerxes, Rodagun. It caused a big hubbub, since it was the first apparent Persian mummy. It was fascinating because it had been mummified in traditional Egyptian fashion, complete with all the organs extracted, including the brain. And I even recall something about golden resin being found inside the body. But deeper examinations revealed a lot of smaller details that didn't add up. One archaeologist remembered being contacted by a middleman about a mummy that resembled the photos, and when he'd had a piece of the sarcophagus carbon dated, he found it was only 250 years old. The inscription also used a Greek form of the name instead of Persian. The bandages dated to the wrong period, and the stone pad was found to be 5 years old. And a lot of other experts noticed that the heart had been removed, which Egyptians absolutely did not do. They quickly decided she wasn't a Persian princess. But here's the freaky part. Further examination on the mummy revealed her to be a woman between 21 and 25 who died around 1996 from some sort of blunt impact, like being hit by a car. There have been a trail of suspects from it, since it was found in possession of some Pakistani and Irani dealers who were trying to sell it on the black market. But no one knows the victim's identity, and we probably never will. Story 21. The Man from Taured. To quickly summarize, this guy had a passport for a non-existent country called Taured. He was picked up by authorities in Japan, I believe, using a fake passport from Taured. When shown a globe, he pointed to where it's supposed to be, but it wasn't there. He became visibly freaked out, and authorities confiscated his belongings and put him in a guarded room overnight, until they figured out if any crime was committed. His room was guarded by two armed guards, and his things were in evidence bags at the police station. When checked on the next morning, he had disappeared from his locked, guarded room. To make things even weirder, his belongings disappeared from the highly secure evidence room at the station. So fascinating. I personally think our reality could overlap others from time to time, and people and things can slip through until reality realizes it's screwed up and corrects itself. Story 22. Astronomers here? In my field, the WOW signal is probably the most famous unexplained mystery. It was basically detected in 1977 by a telescope that was just pointed overhead and looked very similar to what a SETI signal is. It was first noted the next morning by an astronomer who wrote "wow" in the log margins and was never seen again despite extensive follow-up over the years. There have been various suggestions on what the WOW signal was, but no, it probably wasn't comets. Personally, based on my experience with man-made interference, RFI, in radio astronomy, I wrote a paper on distinguishing a real transient signal from that. It was most likely RFI from a satellite or similar, but until we see another signal like it, we just don't know for sure, and that's very fun to think about. Story 23. I have a personal mystery that has plagued my roommate and I for several months. One morning, my roommate woke up and went to the bathroom. She found small, dirty paw prints in the bathtub, on the toilet seat, and in the sink. They looked like they belonged to a kitten. We were perplexed. We have no cats. We left no windows or doors open or unlocked the night before, and nothing was damaged in the morning. We're on the second story, and there are no holes in our walls, floors, or ceilings. We have no fireplace or dog door. We spent a good hour before work that morning, searching for a cat hiding out in our apartment, to no avail. This was about 5 months ago, and it hasn't happened again since, but this is a mystery that'll bother me until I'm old and gray. Another fun dimension to the story is that we frequently joke about having spirits in the apartment. Neither of us are superstitious at all, but living in an old, crappy apartment is more fun if you blame stupid crap on something supernatural. If a cabinet door pops open, we'll say, "Those dang spirits," and slam it shut. Now we've concluded that the spirits have a kitten,